So welcome everyone to reading of Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, text 17. Before we go with the verse, I want to express my gratitude to all of you who reached out and who told me how much you appreciate these readings. For me, it feels more and more like a personal offering to Krishna, but then I'm very grateful that from the other side you come and you express your gratitude, your appreciation, and that reminds me there are actually persons on the other side of this camera who are also present. So thank you very much for your presence and for your attention. Let's go with the verse. Uttama purushastvanya paramatmetyudahritaha yolokatrayam avishya vibhatya vyaya ishvaraha. Translation. Besides these two classes of living beings, there is the greatest living personality, the Supreme Soul, the imperishable Lord Himself, who has entered the three worlds and is maintaining them. We hear about a living being that doesn't fall into this category that we were speaking of in the previous verse when we heard about two classes of beings that we also belong to. But now we are hearing, but there is someone who doesn't belong there, who's a completely different category. And that's the greatest living personality. That's the Supreme Soul, Paramatma, the imperishable Lord Himself. The word that is being used here in Sanskrit, in the verse itself, for Lord, is the word Ishvara. So when I read this today, then I was reminded of another great work where the same word is mentioned several times, and I was thinking of the Yoga Sutras by Patanjali. So in the Yoga Sutras, Ishvara is mentioned, and then there are several verses that describe him a bit, speak about him, that are in connection to him. So I would like to read you a few of these verses. Like the verse 24 in first pada, in the first part of Yoga Sutras. The Lord is a special soul. He is untouched by the obstacles to the practice of yoga, kleshas. He is untouched by karma, by the fructification of karma and subconscious predispositions. And then further, the following verses. Ishvara was also the teacher of the ancients because he is not limited by time. We spoke previously how we are limited with so many things in this world, but then we hear about another kind of a being that is not limited at all. The name designating him is the mystical syllable Om, verse 27. Its repetition, the repetition and the contemplation of the meaning of his name should be performed. Interesting, right? And then in the verse 29, we have this statement. From the repetition and contemplation upon the meaning of his name comes the realization of the inner consciousness and freedom from all disturbances. And there we find out about one reason why in Bhakti Yoga we are very fond, very attached to chanting of the mantras that contain names of Ishvara, names of God. And it's interesting, in the Yoga Sutras, Ishvara appears also in an expression, Ishvara Pranidhana. It means devotion to God. And that devotion to God appears as one of niyamas. Yamas and niyamas are the first two limbs of the practice of yoga. There are 8 altogether, and there are certain observances that an aspiring yogi is observing either in his behavior towards others, or he's observing them in his own practice. So Ishvara Pranidhana is the last of the 5 niyamas. There are 5 yamas, and then Ishvara Pranidhana is the last of the 5 niyamas. And it's interesting because then after naming these and after explaining them a bit, Patanjali also says what is obtained, what is the result if we engage ourselves into observing or performing certain yama or niyama. And the results are different, and it's always something. For example, for Satya, I will read to you from the verse 35 from the second pada of Yoga Sutras. For example, for non-violence, ahimsa, the first yama. In the presence of one who is established in non-violence, enmity is abandoned. What a blessing is that, right? To have such a person around. Or Satya, truthfulness. When one is established in truthfulness, one ensures the fruition of all actions. Great. So it continues like that, and there is always certain result, and the results are, very specific and to a certain amount they're limited to something. But then we have Patanjali telling to us what kind of result do we obtain from devotion to God. Verse 45 of the second pada. From devotion to God comes the perfection of samadhi. So of all the yamas and niyamas, this one, Ishvara Pranidhana, devotion to God, is the only activity by performing which we can actually obtain the goal of all yoga, samadhi. And I thought that's a good point to think about, to consider when we are on a yoga path. And it also speaks how special that soul is, Paramatma, Ishvara, Purushottama, God himself. So I'll leave you with that thought, and I thank you very much for joining me today. I hope we hear each other, or you hear me tomorrow, right?